The morning I discovered Sandra Klein had illegally tapped into my fiber optic line, I was trying to push a critical security patch to 300 servers. Instead, I watched my connection speed plummet from gigabit to something that would have embarrassed a 1990s AOL user. My monitoring software showed an unauthorized device leeching bandwidth like a digital vampire, and the MAC address traced directly to the HOA office in Sandra's garage. I'd moved to Cedar Maple Estates specifically for the fiber infrastructure. As a systems architect working remotely, reliable internet wasn't a luxury, it was oxygen. The quiet cul-de-sac seemed perfect. Mature trees, reasonable neighbors, and most importantly, dedicated fiber lines to each property. What I hadn't factored into my calculations was Sandra Klein, HOA president and self-appointed guardian of suburban conformity. Our conflict started 3 months earlier over something ridiculous. I'd trimmed my hedge into what I thought was an artistic sphere. Sandra saw it differently. "Your antenna bush violates the aesthetic symmetry guidelines," she announced one morning, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. The way she said antenna bush made it sound like I'd erected a cell tower. It was literally a round hedge. Nothing more. When I asked to see the specific violation in writing, she produced a 117-page document called the Aesthetic Symmetry and Suburban Purity Manifesto. Page 73, subsection 4.2 apparently banned aggressive geometric landscaping. I laughed. She didn't. The fines started the next week. $25 for non-compliance. Then $50. Then daily citations threatening to escalate to liens against my property. That's when the internet problems began. At first, just minor hiccups. My smart sprinklers would go offline randomly. Video calls dropped without warning. Netflix buffered during peak performance reviews with my team. I ran diagnostics, called my ISP, even replaced my router. Nothing helped. The slowdowns got worse, always coinciding with HOA board meetings or whenever Sandra sent her mass emails about lawn height violations and approved mailbox colors. The situation escalated when I started working on a Department of Defense contract. Suddenly, my secure VPN connection would drop every morning at exactly 8:03 a.m. Not 8:02. Not 8:04. 8:03, like clockwork. That's when I noticed Sandra's garage office lights flickering on through my home office window. The correlation was too perfect to be coincidence. I started keeping a log. Monday, 8:03 a.m., VPN drops, Sandra's lights on. Tuesday, same thing. By Friday, I'd documented 15 instances of my connection failing at the exact moment Sandra started her HOA presidential duties. My work required security clearance and stable connectivity. These weren't just annoying interruptions, they were threatening my livelihood and potentially compromising sensitive data. Something felt wrong. Call it professional paranoia, but I'd spent enough years in network security to recognize patterns. I installed a packet sniffer and started monitoring traffic. What I found made my blood run cold. An unauthorized subnet was siphoning my bandwidth through a splitter somewhere between my property and the main junction. The stolen connection led to one IP address registered to Cedar Maple HOA headquarters, Sandra's converted garage. I documented everything. Network logs, bandwidth usage graphs, even security footage from my doorbell camera that caught an HOA maintenance worker inspecting landscaping near my utility box with what was clearly a coke splitter sticking out of his pocket. The evidence was damning. Sandra had literally stolen my internet to run her little HOA empire on my dime and my bandwidth. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it. "Community connectivity resources can be pooled for administrative efficiency," she said, quoting some twisted interpretation of the bylaws. "It's in the covenant you signed." The audacity was breathtaking. She'd turned my private fiber line into her personal broadband buffet and expected me to thank her for the privilege. "You use more bandwidth than anyone else in the neighborhood," Sandra continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone usually reserved for explaining why someone's grass was 0.2 inches too tall. "It's only fair that you share with the community. Besides, the HOA needs high-speed internet for security cameras, violation documentation, and resident communications. You should be honored to contribute to neighborhood safety." I stood there, genuinely stunned by her logic. "I pay for gigabit fiber specifically for my work. You've been stealing my service for months." That's theft, Sandra. Federal theft. She laughed, actually laughed, and waved her hand dismissively. Don't be dramatic. It's resource sharing. Very different. Check Section 47B of the Covenant regarding communal utility optimization. I went home and checked Section 47B. It mentioned shared responsibility for streetlight maintenance. Nothing about stealing internet. Sandra had interpreted streetlight maintenance to somehow include digital infrastructure theft. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. That's when I decided to get creative. If Sandra wanted to share my connection, I'd give her exactly what she deserved. I reconfigured my router to create a special guest network just for unauthorized devices. I called it Dial-Up Pit, though she'd never see that name. Any device matching her HOA equipment got automatically routed to this special channel with speeds throttled to 56K. Welcome back to 1998, Sandra. The results were immediate and glorious. HOA board meetings became digital disasters. Video calls froze mid-sentence, transforming Sandra's face into pixelated modern art. PDF violations that usually flew out like confetti now took 4 minutes to load per page. The HOA website crashed trying to upload a single photo of an unapproved garden gnome. Her smart security system turned into a slideshow, capturing one frame every 30 seconds. The best part was watching Sandra try to conduct virtual board meetings. Robert's Rules of Order don't account for connection speeds that predate Google. She'd start speaking, freeze mid-word with her mouth open, then jump cut to a completely different sentence. Board members started calling it Sandra's Remix Hour. One meeting took 3 hours to discuss a single agenda item about acceptable fence stain colors because every document took forever to load. Her frustration manifested in increasingly creative ways. She tried switching to her phone's hotspot, not realizing I'd identified and throttled that device too. She dragged her laptop to the community center, but their internet was somehow also crawling whenever she logged in. The digital net I'd cast was complete. Every device she'd ever used to access my stolen bandwidth was tagged and throttled. Other HOA board members started complaining. Why does it take 20 minutes to approve meeting minutes? Asked the treasurer. Why can't we access the violation database? Wondered the secretary. Sandra blamed everyone but herself. It's probably that bramble man doing something illegal with his antenna bush, she'd insist, completely missing the irony. Sandra's emails became increasingly unhinged. Why is the internet so slow? Screamed one subject line, followed by IT takes 20 minutes to send violations now. She tried to blame Spectrum, the weather, even solar flares. Meanwhile, I maintained perfect gigabit speeds for all my legitimate devices. The beauty of network administration is its precision. You can be very, very specific about who suffers. But I wasn't done documenting. Every piece of evidence went into a folder marked Federal Communications Theft. Because that's what this was, theft of telecommunications services, a federal crime. I'd worked with the FCC before on compliance issues. I knew exactly who to call and what to report. The complaint I filed was thorough, professional, and devastating. The investigation moved faster than Sandra's throttled internet. Within a week, an unmarked van appeared near Cedar Maple Estates. Men in khakis and polo shirts started knocking on doors, asking innocent questions about internet service and HOA fees. Sandra must have sensed danger because the passive-aggressive emails stopped. The HOA website went completely dark. Even her usual Thursday morning violation patrol was canceled. I watched from my window as investigators photographed the utility box where Sandra's illegal tap originated. They had specialized equipment that traced every unauthorized connection back to its source. One investigator spent an hour documenting the professional-grade splitter that had been installed. This wasn't some amateur operation. Sandra had hired someone with telecom experience to steal my bandwidth properly. The investigators also interviewed Sandra's husband, who seemed genuinely shocked. "You mean we haven't been paying for internet this whole time?" I heard him ask. He thought their blazing fast connection was part of the HOA President Perks package. The look on his face when they explained his wife had been committing federal crimes was priceless. At the next HOA meeting, held in person because Zoom was unusable on their stolen connection, Sandra completely melted down. She brought printed screenshots of frozen video calls, demanded I be fined $1,200 for interfering with HOA efficiency, and actually threw her iPad on the conference table screaming, "This is sabotage." That's when the two FCC investigators sitting quietly in the back row stood up and introduced themselves. The room went silent except for the sound of Sandra's clipboard hitting the floor. The investigators explained they were there regarding allegations of unauthorized interception of communication services. Federal Statute Title 47, Section 605. Sandra's face went from red to white to a shade of gray I'd previously only seen on failing hard drives. They presented their findings right there in front of everyone. Unauthorized fiber tap installed on private property. HOA equipment illegally connected to residential service. Theft of bandwidth valued at over $2,000 based on current market rates. Each violation carried potential fines up to $10,000. Sandra tried to stammer something about community resources and administrative efficiency, but the investigators weren't interested in her creative bylaw interpretations. The final verdict came 2 weeks later via certified mail. Personal fine of $25,000 for Sandra Klein. Criminal charges pending further investigation. Immediate cease and desist order for all HOA connectivity through private lines. The letter was dense with legal terminology, but the message was clear. Sandra had committed federal crimes and would pay dearly for them. At an emergency HOA meeting that evening, Sandra stood before the assembled homeowners looking like she'd aged 10 years. $25,000, she kept repeating. $25,000 for internet. Her resignation letter was 2 sentences long. The treasurer later told me she'd started crying when she handed it over, mumbling about bandwidth betrayal and digital persecution.